Welcome to Magnificat TV news program dedicated to providing news from the church. Today is Wednesday, October 11th, 2023, and these are our headlines. The Pope has published a new apostolic exhortation dedicated to ecology. In it, he warns of the imminent danger of climate change caused by man. After a week of Synod celebrations, the news is that there is no news, as requested by the Pope, to avoid media pressures. 5 cardinals have posed questions to the Pope, and as they did not find the answer satisfactory, they have restated the questions. Cardinal Duca, Archbishop Emeritus of Prague, has asked the Pope about communion for divorced and remarried people who have not received nullity. The Bishop Emeritus of Hong Kong, Cardinal Zen, has sharply criticized the current synod and synodality and called for modifications in its functioning. For the Pope, man is responsible for climate change and the destruction of nature, according to the recently published apostolic exhortation.
8 years after his encyclical Laudato Si, the Pope today published the apostolic exhortation Laudato Deum, in which he assumes the thesis that blames man for climate change. Praise God is the name of this letter. For a human being who pretends to take the place of God becomes the worst danger to himself. With these words concludes the new apostolic exhortation of the Pope Francis, published on 4th October, the feast of St. Francis of Assisi. A text that is short as is only about 8,000 words long, compared to the 40,000 words of Laudato Si and 60,000 words of 2016 apostolic exhortation Amoris Laetitia. For Francis engages in a battle with people who in his opinion minimize or outright deny of the seriousness of the threat posed by climate change. In addition, he defaults 10 paragraphs of refuting common objections, such as that the world has historically experienced the period of cooling and warming, and that the measures to protect the environment will destroy jobs. The text maintains the usual practice of the Pope Francis document. 61% of the notes are to the other text by the Pope himself. The reverence of Save's prophetic warning about the Antichrist has also attracted attention. In his tale of Antichrist, Salviu of the foresee that a small group of Catholic, Orthodox, and the children of Reformation will resist and answer the Antichrist. You give us everything except what we are interested in, Jesus Christ. In attempt to simplify reality, writes Francis, there is no lack of those who blame the poor because they have many children, and even they try to solve the problem by mutilating women in less developed countries. As always, it seems that the poor are to blame, but the reality is that small percentage of the rich people on the planet pollute more than the poorest 50%. There can no longer be any doubt about the human origin of climate change, says Francisco. The concentrations of the greenhouse effect gases in the atmosphere remained stable until the 19th century. In the last 50 years, the increase has accelerated markedly. At the same time, the temperature increased with a speed unheard of, unprecedented in the last 2,000 years. Francis called for an end of responsible mockery that presents these issues as something only environmental, green, romantic, often ridiculed by economic interest. Let us finally accept that it is a human problem.
The Synod has celebrated a week of work without any news of what is going in the inside. The Pope has demanded this confidentiality to avoid pressures from the outside.
Recalling Jesus' call to St. Francis to go and repair my church. In this homily at the opening of the Synod, the Pope said, the Synod serves to remind us of this. Our Mother, the Church, is always in need of purification, and unified the faithful wield only the weapons of the gospel: humility and unity, prayer and charity. At the conclusion of his homily, Pope Francis insisted once again that the Synod is not a political meeting, but a convocation in the Spirit, not a pluralized parliament, but a place of grace and communion. The Cardinal and Secretary General of the Synod of the Bishop, Moria Grace, emphasized the importance of the two roots that emanate from the eternal guidelines of the Synod: confidentiality and discretion. Each Synod Father will have only 4 minutes to speak. Monsignor Grace states that it is strictly forbidden to indulge one's own or third party's contribution expressed in a linguistic group or in the plenary assemblies, as well as to make audio or video recordings. In this way, the aim is to ensure that all participants can freely express their thoughts in a protected environment during the Synod. In addition, Grace indicates that the obligation to maintain the discretion remain in force until the end of the Synodal Assembly. The rules also include other legislations, such as the obligation of participants to give a written notice in advance in any possible absence, which will only be allowed in case of a serious reason. A dispute resolution committee will also be established.
5 cardinals asked the Pope about essential matters of faith. Not satisfied with the answer, they have restated their questions differently.
5 cardinals, Brad Mulle, Buge, Sabdol, Sarah, and Zen, sent a set of questions to Pope Francis without making them public to seek clarification on the point of doctrines before the start of the Synod. The Pope's response did not clarify what they consulted, and so they have decided to reformulate the dubia publicly. The papalate claimed they submitted an earlier version of the dubia on these issues on July 10th and received the response from the Pope Francis the following day. But they said the Pope responded with broad answers rather than the usual form of yes or no answers, making it necessary to submit a revised request for clarification. The first of the new questions is this: is it possible for the Church today to teach a doctrine contrary to those it has previously taught in the matters of the faith and morals, whether the Pope ex cathedra, or in the definition of the ecumenical councils, or in the ordinary universal magisterium of the bishop scattered throughout the world? The second question is to know if it is possible in the circumstances for a priest to bless same-sex union, thus suggesting that homosexual behavior would not be contrary to God's law. Linked to that doubt, they ask whether the Church teachings remain that any sexual act outside the marriage and the particular homosexual act constitute an objectively grave sin. In that dubium, they ask, will the Synod of the Bishop, which include only an elected representation of the pastors and the faithful exercise in doctrinal and pastoral matters on which it will be called upon to express itself, the supreme authority of the Church, which belongs exclusively to the Roman Pontiff and cum capit suo, to College of the Bishop? The fourth question is about the female priesthood. Could the Church in the future have the faculty to confer the priest ordination on the women, thus contradicting the exclusive preservations of this sacrament of the baptism, means which belong to very substance of the sacrament of orders, which the Church cannot change? Finally, on the obligation to observe all, can a penitent who, while admit a sin, refuse in any way to intend not to commit it again, finally receive the sacramental absolution?
Cardinal Duca, Archbishop Emeritus of Prague, also asked the Pope a question, in this case about communion for the divorced and remarried.
On the same day that it became known that 5 cardinals have posed 5 dubia to the Pope on the occasions of the Synod on Solidarity, the Discovery for the Doctrine of the Faith has published the answers to a series of questions from Cardinal Duga on access to communion for the divorced and remarried. The response confirmed that the Pope said years ago to the Bishop of Buenos Aires the new perfect doctrine of the faith. Cardinal Pettinazzi has said that, although the priest must provide a pastor a covenant for the individual, it is each person, individual, who is called to place himself before God and expose to Him his conscience with his possibility and his limits, and evaluate his readiness to receive communion. Doctrine of the faith states that in the necessary process of discernment, remarried divorcees should ask themselves how they behaved toward their children when the marital union went into crisis, whether there would be an attempt at reconciliation that consequences the new relationship as for the rest of the family and the community of the faithful. The response also stated that the bishop should develop critical based on the amoris laetitia in their diocese, such as those raised by the bishop of the pastoral region of Buenos Aires, being that Pope Francis confirmed such criteria as the only possible interpretation of the post-synodal exhortation that should be taken as authentic magisterium, that no other comprehensive explanation should be given. Finally, Pettinazzi wrote that the Bishop Conference should agree on some minimum criteria to implement the proposal of amoris laetitia to help the priest in the process of accompaniment and discernment on the possible access to the sacraments of the divorce in the new union without prejudice to the legitimate authority that his bishop has in his own diocese. The magisterium of St. John Paul II, Benedict XVI, excludes the possibility of remarried divorcees receiving communion and absolution if they do not cease to live together.
Cardinal Zen, Bishop Emeritus of Hong Kong, has written a letter to Synod participants alerting them to the dangers of this assembly.
Just before the start of the Synod of Solidarity, Cardinal Zen has written a letter to cardinals and bishops in which he raised serious concerns. The Bishop Emeritus of Hong Kong advocated that the rules of the procedure of the Synod be modified and asked that the debate on the topic and discussion be allowed. The letter accuses the Synod organizers of the manipulating and imposing an agenda rather than allowing for authentic ecclesial discourse. According to Zen, at the stake is nothing less than question of the office of the bishop, and it is based on the theological foundation of the Second Vatican Council. It baffles me that, on the one hand, I am taught that solidarity is a constitutive element of the Church, but on the other hand, I am taught that it is what God expects of us in this century of novelty. And he asks, how could God have forgotten that His Church lives in constitutive elements in 20th centuries of its existence? Zen is even more puzzled and troubled by the hint that the day has finally come when the pyramid will be turned upside down. In other words, that the hierarchy will be overtaken by the laity. On the decision to give voting right to the laity, the Cardinal writes, giving the voting right to the laity may seem to respect the censors of Fiducium, but are you sure that these invited laity are faithful? That these laity at least continue to go to church? In fact, these lay people have not been elected by the people of God as participants. Zen writes.
Our editorial this week is dedicated to commenting on the doubts raised by the changes that may be approved in the Church. The Synod of Synodality has begun, and these first days it is taking place in the midst of a complete informative silence as requested by the Pope. We will see what happens later, but the Synod was preceded by a certain storm. A group of 5 cardinals presented some questions to the doctrine of faith, some questions, some doubts. The dubia, the word is in Latin. These questions have been answered by the Pope with a signature of the prefect of the doctrine of the faith, but they have not satisfied those who asked them, who have again restated their questions, so far unanswered. And there has also been another cardinal, the Archbishop Emeritus of Prague, Cardinal Duca, who again submitted his own question that has been answered as the previous one. We do not know if there will be a counter question by Cardinal Duca. On the very day the Synod was inaugurated, the Pope published an apostolic exhortation, Laudate Deum. on the ecological question, in which he says that the climate change we're suffering is serious, very serious. It is already upon us, and that's something that must be done urgently. But above all, he says that human action has a lot to do with this climate change, that it is not just one more case of all of those that the earth has suffered throughout its history. Man is responsible, at least in part, according to the Pope, for this climate change. Well, as a result of all of these that are happening, I too have some dubia, some doubts, some questions, which I would like to expose, and which of course I have no pretension that anyone should answer them. They are not addressed to a specific person, and I have no right even to have them answered. But I confess that many times they make me suffer, and I am also convinced that I am not the only priest who has asked himself these questions, who has these doubts, and who has these fears. Let's go for the first one. It is said that the divorced and remarried without having obtained the nullity and without living in sexual abstinence, that the divorced and remarried will be able to receive communion if they, in conscience, making their discernment theoretically with a priest, in practice most of them in no way, if they in conscience decide that they can receive communion. Well, according to their discernment, according to their conscience, they can receive communion. And here comes my question. If the priest does not agree, and if the priest is convinced in conscience that there are not sufficient reasons for that couple, that marriage, or one of them to be able to receive communion, will the priest be obliged to give communion against his conscience? And therefore, if for the priest to give communion implies participating in a sacrilege, will be he obliged to participate in that sacrilege? Does the priest have the right to make his own discernment? Does the priest have the right to have a conscience? The layman is given the right to discern and the right to act according to his conscience. It is the priest given the right to discernment and the right act according to his own conscience. And if it were admitted that the individual priest can refuse to give communion, would the parish be obliged to have someone give communion to these persons, even if the pastor does not want to? I give an example, and I think it is an example that may not seem appropriate to some, but it does to me. Imagine a doctor who does not want to participate in an abortion. The Church has always defended that the conscientious objection of the doctor must be respected. Are we priests less than the doctors when for us the Eucharist is, as it should be for every Catholic, for us that it is something vital? With our life we have to be ready to defend the Eucharist? If a doctor's conscientious objection is respected, shouldn't a priest's right to conscientious objection not participate in something that he considers a sacrilege be respected? And if it's requested, if the Church requests it, that a Catholic hospital can also make conscientious objection and not perform abortions in them, and that not only the doctor can refuse, but also the hospital can refuse, should not the same be requested and this conscientious objection be allowed to the equivalent of the hospital, which would be the parish? First dubia, first doubt. Second one, linked to the first. What is about the rest of the regular couples? The couples who live together without getting married, the homosexual or heterosexual couples who live together and have marital relations and who decide according to their own conscience that they can receive communion at any time, on a special day, or every Sunday. They decide, making use of their discernment, that it is not a sin for them and that they can receive communion. If the priest knows, if you do not know, you can refuse because you do not know the situation of the one who comes to receive communion. But if the priest knows and is aware, is he obliged to give communion to people that he knows in his conscience that he knows that they are in mortal sin? Is the priest obliged to participate in a sacrilege? And if the priest refuses, what will happen to him? Punishment by his superiors, reduction even to the lay state, or at least suspension ad divinis? The priest who refuses to give communion to an unmarried cohabitating couple, will that priest be punished? Will this be the case? We will not have, I repeat, the right to conscientious objection. We will not have the right to have a conscience. We will not have the right to be able to discern. Blessing of homosexual or heterosexual couples who live together without marriage. Not communion, but blessing. If the church were to allow such a blessing to unmarried cohabitating couples, and the priest could not in a conscience give such a blessing because he considers that the person can be blessed, but the one cannot bless a state and the situation for which the priest and the church up to now is a sin, could the priest refute the blessing? Or would he be punished if he refused? More dubia. Let us imagine that the female diaconate is accepted. I'm not saying that it will happen in the synod. In the synod, I have already said it several times. I do not think that anything will be approved because it's first part of a 2-year synod. I could be wrong, but this is my opinion. But if the day comes when the female diaconate is approved, and later, of course, the female priesthood, could the priest refuse to concelebrate with a diaconess or to have that diaconess concelebrate in his parish? Because he considers that following the tradition of the church, the priesthood or the female diaconate, which is the first degree of the priesthood, cannot be given to a woman. Would the priest who refused to do so and who refused to have diaconess in his parish be punished? Yet another dubia. It is said that conclusions of a synod are going to become ordinary magisterium. Therefore, with the permission, the approval of the Pope, or even without the approval of the Pope, therefore what a synod concludes will be ordinary magisterium, and it will have to be fulfilled. Well, a synod is not a council where all the bishops participate, but some bishops participate as representatives of their episcopal conferences, and then people appointed by the Pope according to the Pope's criteria, that is to say, the Pope decides more water of this type with this color should be added to the whole, and he does it. It is his freedom and his right, but it is not representative organism of the whole church, or at least it is not representative of the whole episcopate, as the council is. If a synod were to approve something, and that was to be ordinary magisterium, that had to be applied to daily life, could the priest, making use of his discernment, making use of his freedom he has to be faithful to his conscience, could he refuse or would he necessarily have to apply it? And if they were to happen with the synod, would it be the same, for example, with pastoral councils? What was approved in the pastoral councils, would the priest have to apply it even if he did not agree? For example, if he was forced in the pastoral council to present his homily in writing in order to censure those things that the group of lay people in charge did not like, would the priest have to submit his homily beforehand to control of the laity? There could be cases in which the laity are conservative and the priest is not, but as we have seen so far, the opposite is more likely to be the case. Well, these are my dubia. I have more, but I think that for today it is enough. I repeat, I do them without the intention of disturbing, only to expose something that worries me, that's something that torments me, and that I'm convinced that not only worries me, but there are many priests who are also worried, and so the laity can understand what many priests are going through, the doubts we have, the suffering we have. But tomorrow, Saturday, is Our Lady of the Rosary, so in a special way, I always end up asking for prayers. But today, in a special way, I want to ask everyone that tomorrow, Rosary Day, tomorrow, Saturday, we pray this prayer that she likes so much, that we ask the Blessed Virgin with humility, that we ask her to intercede, to intervene before the Father of the Church, that we can get out of this situation of tension and conflict, that the Church can shine again to the light in the midst of the darkness and the salt of the earth, the leaven in the dough. May Our Lady of the Rosary intercede for each and every one of us. Until next week, God willing. We will continue to keep informed of what is happening in the church. In the meantime, you can check our website at www.magnificat.tv. See you next week, God willing.